We started chapter 27, and we are dealing with negative feelings, sadness, concern, worry that come from realization that one is having evil thoughts and desires enter their mind. Right? And last time we spoke about how broadly there are three categories. There are things which are in our direct control. The Alter Rebbe calls them machshava, dibur, ma'aseh, thought, speech, and action. We can at any point, assuming we're functional human beings, we can decide to do something, or we can decide not to do it. We can decide to say something, we decide not to say it. And although we cannot decide not to think something, we can decide to think something else, and being that we can't think two things at once, by default we stop thinking the other thing. And then there are things which are a matter of time. We give an example of yedias Torah, the knowledge of the Torah, right? One's knowledge of the Torah, they can't just will themselves to now know the Torah. And similarly, this is true with midas, with traits. One can't just will themselves to love Hashem. One can just will themselves to be patient. These are things that are in our control, but they're a process of development. And what the Alter Rebbe is addressing is the real possibility that there are things that are not amenable to our decision at all. That a person may in fact be in a state that no matter how much they work in serving Hashem and refining themselves and elevating themselves, etc., 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 they discover that they are plagued by evil thoughts and desires. These evil thoughts and desires, the thoughts refer to thoughts that entail some sort of denial or rejection of the truths of Torah, Hashem. And the evil desires refer to inappropriate desires that should not exist outside of marriage. And that these things, it's possible that no matter how much a person works, they continue to fall into their mind. And so the person may be distraught. And we spoke about why would that be distressing. So again, we have to really adopt a mindset, I call it, a very religious mindset, someone whose their relationship with Hashem is really fundamental to their life, right? If you had thoughts entering your mind that were contrary to your deepest relationships with other people, I gave an example in class, I won't repeat it, someone telling you, at least you're not acting on it, at least you don't dwell on the thoughts, right, it doesn't seem to be much of a comfort. Okay, so we're going to back up a little bit. So we're about the seventh line from the beginning chapter. He should, on the contrary, be happy in his portion, and that though they enter his mind and he averts his mind from them, in order to fulfill the injunction, you should not follow after your heart. That refers to the thoughts that are denials of Judaism. And after eyes, those refers to the immodest desires. After which you go astray. Okay? So this pasuk, which is included in the Shema, do not follow after your heart and your eyes, that you go astray after them. Now, the first thing Alter Rebbe is going to do is he's going to assert that this verse does not refer to tzaddikim. This verse refers to Beinoni. Now, in order for us to read this, we need to just have a few terms clear. The Alter Rebbe has previously defined a tzaddik as describing someone whose love for Hashem is so much a foundational part of their psyche that the result is that effectively they have no ungodly desires. They have no ungodly attachments. A Beinoni is somebody who their love for Hashem is of such a great priority to them that all of their decisions that they make are in that from that perspective, with that value system. And then you have what's called a Rasha. And a Rasha is somebody who their relationship with Hashem is not their highest priority. And what's the evidence that it's not their highest priority? What would be the evidence that something is not your highest priority?
You don't do your action?
Your actions, right? You make decisions that relegate it to a secondary status, right? So it is not, it's very clear, it is not the act of transgression that makes the person a Rasha. what makes the person the Rasha is that Hashem is not important enough to them so that under the right circumstances, they may in fact transgress, right? The transgression is evidence of there being a Rasha. Okay. So the Alter Rebbe doesn't really discuss the Rasha because whether you're a Rasha or whether you're a Beinoni, on a very basic level, Alter Rebbe addressed earlier, is a matter of your decision. You decide that this relationship with Hashem is important enough to you, and you make decisions in how you move forward in life accordingly. But the difference between a Beinoni and a Tzaddik, this is much more profound because this has to do with your fundamental experience of yourself. What do you desire? What do you like? What are you afraid of? What do you feel attached to? What are you repulsed by?
Like naturally.
What?
Like naturally.
I'm not going to use the word naturally. I'm just going to say in total. We're complicated beings. Okay? So a tzaddik is never conflicted between the relationship with Hashem and anything else on any level. That love for Hashem has had such a transformative effect on them. Not that they're never conflicted. Human beings are always conflicted. This is a very important point. A tzaddik is conflicted. But the conflict has to do with the different dimensions of having a relationship with Hashem that pull a person in a different direction. For instance, you might really care for somebody, and on the one hand you want to be close to them, on the other hand you feel you need to give them their space. And thus you're eternally conflicted as to how to relate to them. But it's all within the framework of you just care about this person. A tzaddik has nothing that pulls them away or against Hashem. And that's an effect of the love that they have experienced, the love for Hashem. And a Beinoni doesn't have that. And so as important as the relationship with Hashem is to the Beinoni, it's always cutting against other types of desires, fears, attachments, etc. Is this clear? So we have a pasuk, we have a verse that says you are not supposed to go after your eyes and after your after your heart and after your eyes. And the Alter Rebbe wants to argue that this pasuk, this verse, is specifically addressing the non-tzaddik, the Beinoni. Now, if you read inside, then you can't answer this question. But if you're not read inside, I want you to come up with an answer. Why would a verse that says you shall not go after your eyes, not go after your heart, specifically referring to a non-tzaddik?
Because the tzaddik doesn't have those, like, he doesn't even think about like bad things to do, like he only does the good things.
Right, that makes perfect sense. That's wrong, though.
Oh,
Because by that logic, then the commandment, thou shalt not murder, doesn't apply to anybody who never has a desire not to murder. Right? We don't say that. Right? Do we say, let me say this, do we say that the mitzvah not to murder only applies to people who have a desire to murder?
No. But the people who would have murdered wouldn't do it.
That's separate. That's separate. But in other words, what I want us to understand is that there's a difference between talking about the commandment, right, versus whether I need to actively do something to fulfill it. Okay. In other words, like this. I believe it's the fifth Chabad Rebbe, the Rebbe Shah, but I could be mistaken in the quote, who it attributed to. But that in order for there to be the fulfillment of the negative commandments, Hashem does not need to create the world. You know what doesn't happen if there's no people? Murder. Right?
If there's no people?
Then no one's murdering anybody by default, right? There's no stealing. Right? If God just does not want the negative commandments transgressed, there's a simple solution to that, which is don't create anything. But if you can't create anybody, can you have somebody, for instance, make a bracha? Can you have somebody give tzedakah? Right? The positive mitzvahs, right, their fulfillment necessitates there be some sort of reality, some sort of people in which those things are fulfilled. That make sense? Okay. Taking that from the more like kind of like metaphysical framework to a halachic framework. There are 613 mitzvahs in the Torah. Now, if you open up a Chumash and you count every time God commands the Jewish people to do anything, there's way more than 613. A lot. You can. The simple way to do this is you open up a random page of the Chumash, anywhere from Sefer Vayikra and onward. And that's where most of the stories die down, and you just flip to where where it's not a story, which is not that many pages, and you're just counting how many verses tell you to do something or not to do something. On any given page, it's easy to come up with 10, 15. depending on how much text on that page. Multiply that by how many pages are in the Chumash. So the Rambam, he developed a methodology in his Sefer Mitzvahs, the Book of Mitzvahs, that when we have this tradition that there's 613 mitzvahs, there are criteria for what gets counted. For instance, he has a rule that anything which is a general commandment that doesn't tell you to do something specific or concrete is not a mitzvah of the 613. So he would say that there's no mitzvah to be holy. It doesn't get counted. Even though the Torah tells us a few times to be holy. It says, well, how does one holy? What do you do to be holy? You do mitzvahs, right? So if you do mitzvahs to be holy, then is the mitzvah to be holy telling you to do something specific? No. When it says you're supposed to observe the mitzvahs, that's not another mitzvah, right? So one of the things that he says is we only count mitzvahs that are l'doros, that are meant for all generations. Okay? So, for instance, there is a mitzvah in the Torah not to leave the man, the special food that Hashem provided us in the desert, not to leave the man over from day to day. Is that counted in one of the 613 mitzvahs? No, because it only applied to the generation in the desert. Good? Is there a mitzvah to eradicate the nation of Amalek? Mm-hmm. Now, do you see the problem with the mitzvah to eradicate the nation of Amalek if you're going to count it?
Yeah.
What's the problem?
We don't know.
That's a technicality. Figure it out. Then what?
Do not murder.
No.
Wasn't there like one too much?
What happens if you do the mitzvah?
Then
there's no more Amalek. And if there's no more Amalek, then how's it for all generations? Well, there are people who strongly disagree with the Rambam, therefore, about his whole system. He says, wait, any mitzvah which... He does. So you have to explain, any mitzvah which fulfilling it means that it can never be done again, how does that get counted as an eternal mitzvah? You cannot eradicate the nation of Amalek more than once. Right? Yeah, but that can be destroyed, so.
But it won't. It's next time.
Yeah, but that's not intrinsic in the mitzvah. In other words, there's no mitzvah to build an undestructible Beis Hamikdash. But so what the Rambam says is, he says the mitzvah, the legal obligation is to destroy Amalek. I'm not getting into who and how, that's really not the purpose of the class. The legal obligation is to destroy Amalek. Whether or not there is an Amalek to destroy does not change the fact that the command is still legally in force. Okay? In other words, if God were to magically bring back the nation of Amalek after we wiped them out, then he would not need to reissue the mitzvah of wiping out Amalek. But if Hashem were to all of a sudden decide to give us the man now, we could keep it from day to day. Why? There's no mitzvah against it. So what he does is he says that the mitzvah is addressing a particular circumstance. If that circumstance does not exist anymore, it doesn't mean that the commandment doesn't exist anymore. Good? So if Hashem commands not to murder, that commandment is being addressed to all Jews at all times, right? And if none of us ever want to murder, and therefore on a practical level, the command is, so what? In fact, there's such a view that one of the mitzvahs in the Torah is not to eat bugs.
What?
Not to eat bugs.
That's a mitzvah?
Yes. Several mitzvahs actually not to eat bugs.
It's like part of the kosher. Yeah, it's part of the kosher.
Yeah.
But it's not its own separate mitzvah.
Kosher is a lot of mitzvahs. There's not one mitzvah of kosher.
Bugs in general or specific ones?
Oh, the specific ones. And depending on the bug you eat, you can be violating 4, 5, or 6 different commandments.
Are there any bugs that you can eat?
Yes.
Yeah.
Certain species of grasshoppers. Unless you're Ashkenazi, in which case, not so much.
Do you know the mitzvahs, for the bugs? Why we can't eat them?
Why? Or which
No.
ones?
Why which mitzvahs are connected to the bugs?
Did you? Well, I mean, I hate to be not so nice, but if you paid attention to the end of the parsha last week, we had all of them listed. So just read the parsha. It's like, and if you have this kind, and you have this kind, and if you count them and do the Rashi, it's so depending on the kind of bug you eat, you get up to 5, up to 6. Do they go in water? Do they not go in water? Do they fly? Do they not fly? How many legs do they have? Whatever. So here's the thing. If I remember correctly, there's a view in the Talmud. If I remember correctly, there's a view in the Talmud that says that if God rewards us for not eating bugs, which no one would want to eat because they're disgusting, then all the more so for the mitzvahs that would want it to violate. The implication somewhat being that God really almost didn't need to command us not to eat the bugs because who would want to eat that anyway? So I don't want to get caught up in the bugs, but there does seem to be this idea that you could command a mitzvah that, at least to the vast majority of people, the mitzvah is practically irrelevant because the temptation to transgress it just doesn't exist, the opportunity, right? And by the way, we have this with positive mitzvahs, right? There's a positive mitzvah to divorce one's wife with a written document. Did you know that? It's the positive mitzvah in the Torah.
Yeah.
But the mitzvah is addressed to particular people in particular circumstances, right? And if you're not in one of those circumstances, you don't have to go out of your way to do it, right? It's like we don't kill people so we can do the mitzvah of burying the dead, right? Okay, so the mitzvah is addressed to specific people. So the mitzvah of not murdering is addressed to all people. It doesn't say, well, whether you desire to murder or not desire. Like, no, all of us are required not to murder. And for most of us, most of the situations, it's pretty easy. And for some people, it's not so easy. Okay, good. So the mitzvah to not go after your heart and after your eyes, and these to indulge these prohibited thoughts and desires. I mean, why would they say that mitzvah is being addressed specifically to non-tzaddikim? It could be addressed to everybody. What? Oh, right. So that's what Alter Rebbe adds. He doesn't say transgress, but he says you go after them. And those are Alter Rebbe's notes in the pasuk, which we're going to read. This verse does not speak of the righteous to refer to them as going astray, God forbid, but of Beinanim like him, meaning like the reader, in whose mind do enter erotic thoughts, whether of an innocent nature, etc. Meaning like this. This mitzvah is only applicable if you find the thought appealing. When the Torah says do not go after your heart, let's say your heart refers to thoughts of idolatry. If I now think about idolatry, am I violating this mitzvah? I'm thinking about, ideas that deny the existence of Hashem, let's say. Am I violating this prohibition? No. I'm violating a separate prohibition, because there's a prohibition to guard your soul. But setting that aside, I'm not going. But what if I find those thoughts compelling? They create a sense of doubt. They weaken my sense of devotion to Hashem, right? Right. If the thoughts have that emotional valence to them, right? That type of a pull on my psyche, then when I don't think those thoughts, then I'm doing the mitzvah, because the mitzvah is not addressing the thought; it's addressing the thought. Addressing people having thoughts, addressing people who have these thoughts in a way that it pulls them. Okay, and so is a tzaddik ever pulled towards things that would pull them away from Hashem? No. By the way, you want to go away and check whether you're a genuine tzaddik. If things that are totally forbidden to think about enter your mind, and you find them in no way appealing ever in any way, shape, or form, then that's a good sign that you may in fact be a tzaddik. On the other hand, if you do find them appealing and distracting and pulling you away from God, and lessening your sense of devotion to Hashem, well then, that's clear evidence that you are not a tzaddik. Okay? This is going to be relevant when we get to chapter 28. That's not for right now.
Well, wouldn't you just not think
No, you may in fact. That's what I said. It's be relevant in chapter 28. We'll get to it. But tzaddikim may in fact have. In other words, if we think of thoughts as words and pictures, yes, the very same words and pictures could enter the tzaddik's mind and could enter the non-tzaddik's mind. The different being,
if it just pulls you away.
Right. How they enter the tzaddik's mind, we'll do in chapter 28. But the point that's relevant here is that in the description of mitzvah, it's like saying there's a mitzvah to divorce one's wife with a document. Okay, but it's not addressed to every single married man. It's addressed to a married man in a very specific situation. What that situation is, a dispute between different rabbis and Talmud. We're not going to go into that, right? When the Torah says not to go after your heart and your eyes, it says specifically to the kinds of people who are led astray by their heart and their eyes. If you're not that kind of person, this mitzvah doesn't apply to you. So it turns out that there is a mitzvah that only non-tzaddikim can do. Okay? That's what the Alter Rebbe's point is. It doesn't follow from this that non-tzaddikim can't, all the negative commandments they can use. A non-tzaddik can also fill the mitzvah of not murdering. How did tzaddik fill the mitzvah of not murdering? I mean, he doesn't have a desire to murder people, right?
Not embarrassing someone.
No, like let's go with the real murder. Okay, right. Are there situations where a tzaddik may in fact desire to kill somebody, but not like murder them? No? Okay, so there's a
Yes.
halacha. Yes, there's halacha. There's halacha. The halacha is we have a rule called ein doichin nefesh mipnei nefesh. We do not push off one life to save another. Okay? In other words, you are not allowed to kill person A in order to save person B. Okay? Now, God forbid a person's in a situation where if they do nothing, person A is likely to die, and person B is likely to die. But if they kill person A, then for sure person B will live. Or if they kill person B, for sure person A will live.
We read out, there's nothing about the twins.
Yes, I was specifically not talking about the case of twins, because the case of twins adds an added factor that complicates the issue. If it's not the case, it's not like the twins, just the way I placed it, just like that. So what's the halacha? You do nothing.
Really?
Because you're not allowed to kill a person, even to save someone else's life. So you can't kill person A to save person B. You can't kill person B to save person A, even though it's very likely that as a result of that, both person A and person B will.
Well,
Now,
if it's sure, not likely. Like, sure, person A will die if you don't kill person B. Like, you know, like, it's in your hands. You're still not allowed to, like...
Without certain other complicating factors, correct. Because it turns out that the mitzvah of not murdering is basically an absolute mitzvah. It's not. There's very little that can limit its scope.
What if your life is all the same? Like, it's your person A.
If you're a person A, you still can't do it. Yeah, 100%.
But isn't that kind of self-defense in some way?
No, self-defense is only if you're killing the person who's killing you. That's what I say. You can add complicating factors to change this. My point is like this. You don't need to be an evil person to actually have to be faced with the issue that you have to consciously make a choice to fill the mitzvah of not murdering, right? Because it doesn't say anything about your desire to murder. It doesn't say, oh, if you're an evil person who wants to kill someone for their wallet. No, it just says that if you're not the base in executing somebody, you're not the legal government putting someone to death, you're not in the case of war, and you're not killing a person in the proper modes of self-defense, whatever the Torah allows. You're not in those categories. You're not allowed to murder. You're not allowed to kill people. That's called murder. You're not allowed to do it. Just flat out. Okay.
Doctors.
It's a huge problem. Okay. I'm not going. And you can. This can. In other words, the prohibition of murder can be very, very uncomfortable for the most morally God-fearing person because it puts you in a bind. Because for very holy reasons, you might want to do. You want to save someone's life, right? And these are not simple matters. This mitzvah doesn't say that. It doesn't say the act of thinking the thoughts is prohibited. It says, for those of us who are tempted by such thoughts, it is forbidden. So if you're not that kind of person, then this mitzvah doesn't apply to you. Which is a wild idea. But what that does also means is that there's a mitzvah that a tzaddik is incapable of doing. So in a weird sort of way, can a tzaddik actually fill all 613 mitzvahs? No. In fact, there's no one who can fill all 613 mitzvahs, by the way. Because some mitzvahs you can only do if you're a Kohen, and some mitzvahs you can only do if you're a Levite, and some mitzvahs you can only do if you're the king, and something like that. It's not possible to do all the mitzvahs. But we have another breakdown. There's some mitzvahs you cannot do if you're a tzaddik.
What if he wasn't a tzaddik? Can a person become a tzaddik?
Yes, a person can become a tzaddik.
So then
But the Alter Rebbe is addressing us who are not tzaddikim right now. And the Alter Rebbe is saying, look, you are miserable because you have these thoughts flopping into your mind, right? But in fact, you should rejoice because you are being granted an opportunity to do a mitzvah, right? And you can't make the argument, that's very important, you can't make the argument, oh, well, if I didn't have the thoughts, I would also be doing mitzvah, I wouldn't be thinking those thoughts. Like, no. If you never had these types of thoughts, if you never had these types of temptations, if you didn't have this kind of a pull, you wouldn't be by default in alignment with the mitzvah, like by default right now, I'm not murdering people. No. You are doing a mitzvah that only you are capable of, or only people like us are capable of doing. When he averts his mind from them, he is fulfilling this injunction. Indeed, the rabbis lesson have said, he who has passively abstained from committing a sin receives reward as though he has performed a precept. This is another important point. It is not straightforward that there's such a concept of fulfilling a negative commandment. Now, it is a little bit common knowledge that this idea is this, but the sages actually have to assert it. Right now, we all deserve, even though Chassidus doesn't talk about reward and punishment, we all right now deserve to be rewarded for doing what right now? Learning Torah. What about not wearing wool and linen? Do we deserve to be rewarded for not wearing wool and linen?
Sure.
No.
No, because it wasn't a choice, which is like
Yeah. Is there a garment of one linen that you really want to wear and you just made a decision not to wear it because God said no?
No.
So, right, there's an idea. The act of the choice to not do something that you wanted to do counts as a actual thing that is deserving of reward, just like when you what do you call it?
So if you like overcome a desire to break a mitzvah, then you're
That's
not,
like
then you're not. No, but like if you have a desire to like eat not kosher food, and you keep having this desire every time you don't eat not kosher food, you're doing a mitzvah. But then as soon as you like overcome that, you stop doing that mitzvah.
You stop, right? In other words, like this. You are in. Look at this way. You are in fulfillment of the mitzvah, but you are not. But it is not counted as if you are fulfilling the mitzvah. You're not rewarded. In other words, like this.
So once you get good enough at the mitzvah, then
Right. In other words, it's hard to say as a general rule that your average religious Jew, it actually is going to be it gets rewarded for keeping kosher. Why? Because your average religious Jew
doesn't have a desire.
just eat kosher. That's just the way it is, right? Okay.
So deacon don't get a lot of reward.
For this is specifically with negative commandments.
Right.
Okay. What's interesting about this? So Alter is making 2 points. Number one, if you're tempted to transgress a commandment and then you stop yourself, that itself counts as doing a mitzvah. And B, this mitzvah you can only do if you're the kind of person who's tempted. Right? In other words, I could construct a situation where a tzaddik is fulfilling the mitzvah of not murdering by being presented with a very extreme situation, going through the halacha, realizing the halachic conclusion is whatever it is, and following through, even though his godly soul wishes on some level that he could make the opposite choice to save some life. Like you could have you've had such situations. What's special about this mitzvah is only someone who's tempted by the evil can do it. And again, like any time you're tempted to transgress any commandment, when you actually are tempted and you, for lack of words, actively are passive, that counts as doing a mitzvah. So, to put it in a slightly different context, if it was Pesach and you discovered that you didn't have any matzah, you'd probably be a bit upset, right? And if someone showed up at your door with some matzah, right then and there, how would you feel? No, right then and there. Yeah. Okay, so how should you then feel if one of these thoughts enters your mind? Because that's what? It's an opportunity to do a mitzvah. Now, the altar is not done. Okay, that's the consequently, he should rejoice at his compliance with the injunction as when performing an actual positive mitzvah. Okay. Now, but that explains why I should be happy. It doesn't really address the fact that in reality, a person can still be quite miserable about this.
Because the fact that you're not that thought is indicative.
That's right. And here the Alter Rebbe is going to address 2 points. Okay? I think the easier thing to do is to start talking about the topic and then reading it a bit inside rather than pulling it out from the text line by line. What is the enemy of joy? In other words, if I want to make sure that I never feel any joy, what should I cultivate to destroy all joy in my life?
Sadness.
How do you cultivate sadness? Boredom? No. Boredom actually can produce joy. You know how? Try this. Create a situation where you're bored, right? Force yourself to stay there. It's really uncomfortable, right? Then what happens? I'm assuming you're mentally healthy. If you're not mentally healthy, no try. But if you're assuming you're like normally mentally functional person, you're just bored. Now what? You stay. Make sure you stay in the bored situation.
You find something to do.
That's right. And when you find something to do, that thing,
Makes you happy.
right, it brings you back to life. Yes.
But then you're not bored anymore.
That's right. Because boredom is a self-defeating thing. So actually it's important to learn how to be bored. You stunt your joy in life by not knowing how to be bored. It's like the discomfort of beginning to exercise. If you let that inhibit you, you never exercise. But if you like able to oh yeah, I'm bored. Boredom is a thing. And you experience the boredom, it takes you to the other end, and you discover things about yourself, about life, you develop an inner sense of your life. What all sorts of interesting, cool things. You become creative. Yeah, boredom is very important. So one of the things that my wife was taught by her mother, being bored is incredibly important. Pretty much, you learn how to be bored.
Kids aren't bored anymore because they just have TV.
But yeah, boredom is a transitory state, and many of us just back out of it before we get through the other side. No, boredom is not going to kill happiness long term. If anything, the opposite. Again, if you don't have the mental wherewithal to go through that, that's a different story, right? But what will definitely kill all joy in life? Like if you really want to kill joy in a miserable life, you should work on developing this trait. Entitlement. The more you feel like you deserve something, the more that's how you approach life, the less joy you will feel. Now, people often say expectation, and I want to differentiate them slightly. And again, I don't really care so much about the wording. You can say whatever words you want, and it's English, but I do think it's important, right? If I expect the sun to rise tomorrow, is that going to remove the joy in life? No. Okay? If I feel like I deserve the sun to rise tomorrow, what's the difference? What's the difference?
It's about you.
It's about you, right? And then basically everything that happens, I'm judging how much it validates my sense of entitlement and self-importance, etc., and how much it doesn't. And the more entitled you are, the more the world is going to fail to give you what you feel like you deserve. What happens if a person feels like they don't deserve anything? Now, this is a tricky thing. Okay? What's an example of someone who feels like they don't deserve anything?
Low self-esteem.
No. Little children. Little children don't feel like they deserve it.
It's like they feel like they deserve not everything, but like they just will get things.
They do get things. And they have lots of expectations. They don't necessarily feel like they deserve anything. Little children don't feel like they deserve anything. You know why?
They know how to differentiate between the two.
Because deserving means you start to have enough of a sophisticated thing. There's the worthy and there's the unworthy, and there's two categories. I'm in the worthy category, and then you just build the whole narrative. It actually develops like somewhat of a developed sense of yourself.
But what about this thing the kids have? It's like, oh, it's not fair.
Two things. One, fairness is not exactly the same thing. That's number one, because you can see that kids also appreciate fairness. The other thing is with often when kids are using fair, they're just speaking about jealousy, which is they want what they don't have. Kids can be jealous, but it's not the same thing. They're related, but they're not the same thing. And there are other things that really ruin happy. But deserving is a much more insidious thing, because deserving basically means a crime has been committed because you didn't get it. If I deserve something, is it okay to take my hat without my permission? Why?
Stealing. It's yours.
Yeah, right. So there's this sense like, it's mine, right? And if you take it, right, I'm entitled to, my property, right? And therefore, if someone takes my hat, right, even if in the grand scheme of things not the end of the world, it feels like some sort of a deep violation, right? Okay, yeah? Are you entitled to medical care? Think about that deeply before you answer the question.
From.
Exactly, from. Right, because if you're entitled, then who's obligated? If you're entitled, right, who's obligated to give it to you? And then if they don't, then they're committing some sort of a crime against you. Like that's like a pretty self-absorbed way to experience the world, right? And so basically, the more a person feels entitled, the more a person feels, I deserve it, they say in Hebrew, magia li, right? The more a person has that kind of an attitude, the more basically everything in life is, well, did I get what I deserve or did I not get what I deserve? So either like, well, it's like, you didn't steal my hat. That doesn't make me happy. That's just normal. So it's either normal or a crime. That becomes your whole motive. You either get what you deserve or you didn't. Whereas like, now, so again, most of us don't have this to the extreme, but the more a person has that, the more it kills. On the other hand, if a person realizes, like, not that it's not about deserving or not deserving. It's, of course it's good to have good things. Of course it's good for life to be good, right? Right? I want life to be good for myself. I want life to be other people. So can I appreciate the goodness in life? Sure. Okay. But if I can is appreciating goodness in life also means I don't take that goodness for granted. Right? Because the more a person feels entitled, the more a person feels they deserve things, right? They also start to feel like they take it for granted, and if they don't get it, it's a huge problem. But if I don't feel like I'm deserving, I don't feel it's good to have good things, and I'm very appreciative of the good things that I have. I'm very appreciative of the people who provide those good things. I'm very appreciative of Hashem providing me those good things, right? I don't take for granted the good things I have. If you live life like that, how joyous are you going to feel? What? And
Everything's gonna make you happy.
Right.
I feel like.
By the way, and this is why I'm saying little kids are like this. I have a 5-year-old son, and he tends to wake up right around when I do. He often actually wakes up a little bit earlier, and goes into my wife's bed, and then so I wake up, and this happens like every other day. I wake up, and he's like lying there in my wife's bed, and he looks and he says, Boker Tov. I'm like, well, he thinks it's a wonderful thing to be alive, right? And again, children are immature and they're chaotic. I don't mean to say we should all revert back to children, right? But like, if you ever walked outside, it's a nice day. Like, it's a nice day. Yeah. Now, if you live in Israel, you can expect the weather to be nice because the weather tends to be pretty predictable, right? You could still not take it for granted, right? But if you're like, every day is supposed to be like this, and then one day it rains, it's like, it's raining.
It's like winter in Israel.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is how we lack of it.
But you understand what I'm like saying? This is very, very important, right? And so to put this in a more positive way, a sense of humility. Humility, what I say, is just being honest with the reality of like our failings, our weaknesses, that we're not necessarily more important than anybody else, right? Being a certain humility, it opens us up to a lot more joy than if we're feeling self-important and entitled. Good? Okay. So now that we have that in mind, let us read what the Alter Rebbe writes. On the contrary, such sadness is due to conceit in that he does not recognize his position. Why would a person be sad that they're having these unholy thoughts enter their mind? Because they do not recognize their position.
They're not
So in Hebrew it's better also in English. They don't know their place. Right. But let's see how he puts it, because this is he puts this in a way. There's a way in which this can get slightly distorted. Hence, he is sad at heart because he has not attained the rank of a tzaddik, inasmuch as the righteous are certainly not troubled by such foolish thoughts. For had he recognized his place, that he was very far from the rank of a tzaddik, and would it be that he be a Baini and Alka person even for a single moment throughout his life, then surely this quality of the and this surely is the quality of the service of the Baini to subdue the evil impulse from arising in his heart. So he's saying something. There's more to read, but the person isn't being honest with themselves. That they feel entitled to be a tzaddik, and they're not a tzaddik. So how do they feel? Sad, disappointed, miserable. Okay. Instead, how should they feel? Happy about what? That's not what he says here. He said that earlier. He said if he's very far from a tzaddik, and would it be that he be a Bainani, not a wicked person, even for a single moment throughout his life? The line between being a Bainani and not being a Bainani, being a Rasha, is a very fine line. And just because you're a Bainani today, does that guarantee you're going to be a Bainani the rest of your life?
Can you switch? You can switch off every
Well, no. So let me explain to you. Let me put this with an analogy which is a little bit more concrete. Okay, there are some people who will never be poor unless they act stupidly. Okay, can you throw out some names of people who will never be poor unless they act stupidly? Give me an example. Elon Musk. Elon Musk, unless he acts stupidly, will never be poor.
Jeff Bezos.
Right? Like literally, they have right. Literally, they have so much money that they could spend as much money as I could possibly imagine on stuff for their own personal life, and not run out of money. It's mind-boggling, right? And there are people who maybe aren't that wealthy, but again, unless they're stupid, right, or all of society collapses into some sort of apocalyptic hellscape, they're not going to be poor. But then there's people like me, people like probably many of you and your parents, which is that you work and hopefully you have some savings and hopefully but it's not an automatic given that you're going to be able to pay for all of your expenses and live comfortably and have a cushion in case something happens, right? That's something that you need to maintain, right? And if a person has that realization that I'm not entitled to be independently wealthy, that's just the way it is, right? Are they grateful that they have a job? Are they grateful that they have a decent salary? Are they grateful that they're able to put a little bit of money away, in case something happens, right? They feel good about that, right? But if they feel entitled to be a billionaire, then they're just going to be miserable, right? So the Alter Rebbe is saying something like this. Okay, you're a Beinoni, for argument's sake. You're a Beinoni. Is that like a given? That's like an accomplishment? Like, I'm a Beinoni. It's the Beinoni status. And now it's now I get to move on to level 2, tzaddik. Maintaining your life as a Beinoni is a huge life's work. Should you take it for granted that you're going to stay a Beinoni? Should you just say, well, that's a given. Now I'm entitled to something more? There's something deeply dishonest with a person's self about who they are, their own life circumstances. Right? And this is the thing. Humility doesn't mean thinking that you're a bad person. Humility really basically means that you're not so obsessed with yourself. And part of that, one of the facets of that, is a certain acceptance of the reality, the external reality of our lives, the internal reality of our lives. And the reality is, even if you're a Beinoni is like having a good paying job and having, 2 to 3 months worth of savings in the bank for a rainy day. It's a good place to be, but it doesn't guarantee how the rest of your life is going to go, right? And have what's called in Hebrew hakaras hatov, gratitude, appreciation, right? To invest, to make sure you don't make you don't mess this up, right? So where are you getting off? Well, for argument's sake, the reader, you're a Beinoni. Where do you get off feeling miserable that you're not a tzaddik? Because it's not, oh, you should accept the lower status. That's not what the Alter Rebbe is saying. There's not an acceptance of the reality of what it is to be who you are and to live your life. And that where you're holding right now, that itself is that's tremendous. That really is tremendous. And if a person really is able to appreciate that, okay, we feel entitled because the way I like to think about it is like this. If you're looking at a map, you can stick a pin wherever you want, right? Because you're not, right? But if you're in the real world, you can't just magically just pick a point and be there. You are where you are. You're actually in the real world, in a specific place, right? And you're not going anywhere unless you deal with the place you actually are first, right? So when we're like, oh, there's this higher level tzaddik, why am I not there? It's like, you can only think that way. You're not embedded in your own life. When you're embedded in your own life, you realize, wait a minute. Oh, the fact that I'm not sinning, the fact that I prioritize my relationship with Hashem so deeply, this is not a given. This is something that requires investment. This is something that I should be grateful I'm able to achieve. I should dive into Hashem that I'm able to maintain. And the more I'm invested in that, the less the feeling of entitlement that I ought to be at this level higher is actually going to be part of my mind. So Alter Rebbe is saying here 2 things. The first thing we learned is that, first off, this is an opportunity to do tremendous mitzvah. So you should be happy. Why aren't you not happy? Not because you don't appreciate it. You could appreciate that. You said, so I get to this great mitzvah, but there would be so many greater things I could do if I was a tzaddik. So why am I not a tzaddik? That misery is coming from a sense of entitlement. And where does entitlement come from? Entitlement comes because a person allows themselves to wander out from being honest with the reality of their life, from the humility to recognize. Going back to the example I used with the sunny day, do you control the weather? So if you actually stop and pause the fact that you really don't control the weather, and it's a nice day, you should like there's it this sometimes gets read, and I think it's very wrong to say, oh, you're not supposed to be a tzaddik, so you shouldn't aspire to it. And the reason why is because Alter Rebbe says earlier in time, you should aspire to be a tzaddik. Is there anything wrong with aspiring to be a billionaire? Even if you work a 9-to-5 job and, you know, are having a hard time paying off rent, there's nothing aspiring to it, right? But it would be weird if you're miserable about it. It's like, I don't know, if you have a mortgage and you're able to pay it off, it's a little bit of struggle, you have a job, like, really, that's not a given, right? That requires, because you want to aspire to more, great, aspire to more. Right? Aspiring doesn't make people miserable. It's a sense of entitlement. Entitlement comes from a detachment to the honesty, the reality of our life. I'll give you another example. God willing, you're all going to get married, yes? And you're going to have children. Okay. My father likes to say you have two choices. You can have happy children or a perfectly clean house. You don't get both. It doesn't mean you should live in squalor, but it means that if you're going to have children, right, then what's going to happen? Have you been to people's houses where like they have little kids and everything's perfectly clean? I've been to people's houses like that, and you get this sense that it's a little like it's like a museum. It's like you don't want to live there. It's fine. Maybe there's a room like that the kids don't go to, but there's a certain reality of things. Like yes. Okay? There's a reality that when you have little children, life is going to look different, and things are going to have a certain. And like you can sit and be miserable. You can say, no, that's the reality of what this is, and like this is a good thing, and it comes with its own issues. It doesn't mean you don't also, at some point, appreciate there'll be a time when your kids get older, move out, and you can have your house be calm and quiet. You can appreciate that also. This idea shows up in many areas. Alter Rebbe, I don't think he's innovating this idea. He's just applying it to this thing. It is. If a person can have the humility to realize that prioritizing relationship with Hashem to the extent that I would not do anything that compromises that, no matter how much I'm tempted, realizing that is a tremendous thing to achieve, right? And to maintain, and has value. If I'm in touch with that, I'm not going to be miserable that I'm not a tzaddik. It doesn't mean I won't aspire to be a tzaddik. It doesn't mean I don't value being a tzaddik. It just means I won't be miserable about it. And once I'm not miserable about it, I will be able to have joy in the mitzvah that I'm doing, which is not turning after my heart, not after my eyes. Yeah.
This is all under the assumption that you are a baby.
Correct.
Like, a lot of the people, like, maybe you're not holding at that level, or like even if you can aspire, or like in certain essences aren't fully there. And then like if you're a Russia, then there isn't a reason to be upset because like you're there because it's your fault.
Chapter 26. We discussed that, right? We did. In other words, are you miserable? In other words, like this. Are you miserable because of what you did? So, we're not saying that's not justified. Alter Rebbe is very clear. That's justified, just is this the right time and place to feel miserable, right? He didn't say it wasn't justified to feel miserable. And then in terms of like the practicalities of tshuva, well, the practicalities is just the decision, right? If you feel miserable because you sinned 5 minutes ago, so guess what you shouldn't do now? And that's just a simple choice in the moment, right? So in terms of the practicalities of like concrete tshuva, now I'm not going to sin. It's an in the moment thing. And in terms of like the deeper thing, what does this say about me in relation with Hashem? I was like, yeah, you're messed up, and you really probably should feel bad and process and deal with that, but not in a way that compromises your service of Hashem, not in a way that leads you into temptation to sin further, and therefore this needs to be relegated to the right time and place. 100%. The other person doesn't say there's no right excuse to feel bad about yourself. Here he's saying, but this is not that. This is you're making all the right decisions. And if you're making all the right decisions, right, and you're in touch with how profound that really is, right, and that within that you're doing something very unique and very special, then there's reason to be joyous. There's no reason to be miserable. And again, it doesn't mean you have to abandon any desire to be a tzaddik. It doesn't mean that at all. Another way of putting it is if a person's a little bit more in touch with himself, they tend to feel a lot less entitled. They feel a lot less like, I deserve this and I deserve that. And they tend to be a lot less miserable. Yeah.
So if like right now I'm not sitting, that means I'm a Beinoni?
No.
And then
I wish.
I sit, means I'm
No.
not.
Right now, you're a Beinoni if right now it would be true to say about you that you would never sin no matter how tempted you are because your relationship to Hashem is that important to you. Is that true right now? So you can emulate a Beinoni and you can work on that, but that's what it means to be a Beinoni. The sin is evidence of not being a Beinoni. The sin is the lack of sin does not make you a Beinoni. Because a Beinoni is that the person has that kind of relationship. By the way, if we break our Judaism down into different facets of our life, and we don't look at the whole person holistically, we're all Beinoni. In that area. Are there areas of your relationship with Hashem, no matter how tempted you are, you wouldn't compromise those things? Yeah. So like your average Jew is like a Beinoni when it comes to eating on Yom Kippur. It's not that he's not hungry on Yom Kippur. It's not that he's not looking at the clock waiting for when it's going to be over. But it's not like he's like, maybe I could sneak back and eat something I didn't even noticing. Because it's Yom Kippur, you're not going to do it. For some people, and by the way, by the same logic, there are certain facets of our Judaism where we're tzaddikim. The classic example would be converting to another religion. The vast majority of Jews are like, I really wish I could go to mass and be a Catholic, but God said no, and I won't compromise. It was just like, it's not for me. Like, I'm not remotely interested in that. That just gives me the heebie-jeebies. Right? So, the author is talking holistically about our overall relationship with Hashem, but you can then, and this is not me just saying so, the Rebbe says this in a Sikha, and this is a well-known part of tradition, is that people are multifaceted, and so you can look at a particular facet of our lives. But yeah, I mean, if you're miserable because you're making bad decisions, so number one, stop making those bad decisions, and number two, make sure that the misery is constructive, which we learned chapter 26. This is something, it's not about your decisions, it's that you're faced with this circumstance. And I was like, okay, well, if you were honest about who you are and what is entailed in you continuing to be a Beinoni, you continuing to prioritize your relationship with Hashem, you continue to make the right decisions, right? And you recognize that this actually is a unique opportunity to fulfill a mitzvah, like a positive mitzvah. You have no reason to be miserable, and you have every reason to be joyous. Okay, good. I think, personally, the second point, as we've just learned now, is much more difficult than the first point. Yes, because it is not easy to recognize our place. Okay. No, I think it's very hard for people to do this. Okay, it's very hard for a person to recognize the fact that taking a certain we just like I think we all recognize that taking for granted that of course I deserve X, Y, and Z when it comes to material things is a little bit silly. But when you talk about things that are a little bit more meaningful and personal, it's not so simple. For instance, do people get frustrated when they realize that they are impatient, weak-willed, jealous? Right? Why do you get why? We spoke about this last week. Why? Because there's this false expectation that somehow, once I recognize it's a bad thing, I should just be able to just very quickly get rid of that trait. Is that like expectation based anywhere in reality? And if I was based in reality, it's not that I feel so great that I have these negative traits, but like, okay, like, is the progress I'm making genuine or is it not genuine? If it's genuine, it's probably going to be slow progress, right? But you see what I'm saying? Like, it's not easy. I mean, this is one reason why I think a lot of people get disillusioned when they learn Tanya. You learn Tanya, and the Alter Rebbe describes certain things, like being a Beinoni. It's like, a certain level of love of Hashem, devotion to Hashem, fear of God, whatever it is, yeah? And it's like, well, okay, I learned it, I understood it, I was convinced that this makes sense, this is true, this is proper, and then, like, a person tries to live up to it, and then they find, like, after, like, a week or a month, this is not remotely happening, like, they're not there, and they're just very disillusioned. And so it's like, are you in touch with yourself? Like, are you aware of the reality of what enterprise you just embarked on? How long that's going to take? How much work that involves?
We're basically all not in touch with our own reality.
Yes. Which is, by the way, how many of the medieval commentators understand what the sin of the tree of knowledge of good and evil is that we live in a fantasy world of our own making rather than the actual reality of the situation.
Sometimes not.
well, we're not trapped by that. We have the ability to realize that and to be honest with ourselves. And then first of all, it's a decision to be honest with ourselves. Another thing, you should have friends. Friends help us keep us honest. So that's what the Alter is saying here in this context. But the underlying message, I think, is true in many areas. To move this to a slightly different area, there is a concept called tshuva. Contrary or in distinct from tshuva, there's a concept called chinuch, education. What's the difference between tshuva and education? Tshuva is returning back to God. What's education? Enabling a person to be able to live life the way they should. Okay? So, let us say a person did not grow up keeping Torah mitzvahs. Is this fundamentally tshuva or fundamentally a question of education? Education, right? Because, and there may in fact be an element of tshuva, but I mean, the person doesn't, on the most basic level, they don't have the habits of doing the mitzvahs, right? We're very habitual creatures, right? They don't have the genuine appreciation of how critical and serious it is to make sure they're in compliance with the mitzvahs, right? Those are things that take time to cultivate, right? So let's say a person, they become Bal Tshuva, and this is happening, well, they're complaining that they're not holding a certain place, and something that I asked them, I was like, complaining about, I don't know whatever they're complaining about, and I was like, just out of curiosity, like, how long have you been keeping Shabbos and kosher for? It's like 7 months. Like, well, if in your 20s you decided to join an entirely different culture, and you've only been doing it for 7 months, do you think you would like feel like as totally fluent and into with everything as if you've been doing it from birth and you're native and achieved it? Like that just doesn't seem realistic, does it? And there's a way in which like, oh, right, like why would you expect that? This idea again, Alter Rebbe is using it here in this specific context. But you take this idea seriously, because again, not everything is a tshuva, not everything's a moral failing. Some things are, again, he's not talking about this here. Some things are a person didn't get the right education, they didn't get the information, they didn't develop the habit, and those things take time. They didn't develop, they didn't have the maturity yet. Like, why would you expect that those things happen overnight? And so Alter Rebbe is saying this idea in terms of maintaining this Beinoni-like relationship with Hashem. It's not a given. Tremendous investment. Be honest with yourself about it. I have a friend of mine who's a therapist, and he says that this is actually a technique they do in therapy. I'm not a therapist, I don't know stuff, but that's what he said, is that sometimes people feel like they're not making any progress because what ends up happening is that they don't notice that the thing that they were struggling with has actually improved in a very profound way. They just notice all the ways in which it didn't improve. Right? And to notice like that was actually a serious improvement. And it didn't come easy. And it's not a given. And not everybody, it's not everybody just achieves that automatically. That took effort, that took time. And maintaining is going to and have a value for that. Right? Does that mean the person now shouldn't aspire to more? No. Okay, so do not read this as saying, God was saying, be satisfied with being a Beinoni, don't aspire to be a tzaddik. He's not saying that. Okay. Now, he actually describes the unique type of service the Beinoni does. So it's right after, I'm going to go back a little bit. This is the quality of the Beinoni. Their service to subdue the evil impulse and thought rising from the heart to the brain and completely to avert the mind therefrom. Notice where the evil impulse is coming from. Where did it say the evil impulse is coming from? You don't see where I'm reading from? It's in the middle of the left-hand column after the colon, to subdue. This is what the Beinoni is supposed to do, to subdue the evil impulse and thought rising from the heart to the brain. Where is the evil impulse coming from? From the heart. Where does that mean it's coming from? Whose emotions? Mm-hmm. So is this evil thought coming from some sort of like outside force coming to tempt you, or these are your own desires and your own emotions? In other words, there is an idea that's called the Yetzer Hara. Okay? And there is a common way of relating to the Yetzer Hara. The common way of relating to the Yetzer Hara is that the evil inclination, there's me, and I'm like a good person, and I'm wonderful, and then comes along the Yetzer Hara, and it's like some sort of like evil force and trying to tempt me and pull me away from Hashem. Does that sound like what's being described here? No, what's being described here is those desires are actually.
But that's an interesting question now, because what do you define as yourself?
But we're not saying that it's the totality of yourself.
But you would describe the animal as yourself.
Your animal soul is definitely yourself. Is it the totality of yourself? How you should frame that? That's a good question. We'll get to later in time. But it's definitely part of yourself. Yes, 100%. So to put this, going back to the analogy I said before, a person who is not like independently wealthy and phenomenally rich and works for a living, should they think of themselves as poor or rich, or neither? I would say both. Yes. Rich and poor, yes. It's called dialectical thinking. It's very important. Yes. Why are they poor? Because they need others to help provide them, right? They need employment in order to have the money to pay for their bills, right? And without that, and recognizing, right, that you're not this independently wealthy person, right? God forbid a person gets fired, God forbid a tragedy happens, they don't have the insurance, right? The whole financial regime could be upended completely. Like they're 1, 2, 3 steps away from financial disaster, right? On the one hand. And on the other hand, everything that they need in life, do they have the money to pay for right now? And if you have everything you need, are you impoverished? Do you see what I'm saying? Like, in other words, if I don't have what I need, so then I need to figure out how to get what I need. Okay, but if I have what I need, right? I have the money to pay my bills, to send my kids to school. I have that money, right? Okay. So on the one hand, as our sages say, who is rich, someone who's satisfied with a lot. I have what I need. I should be like Baruch Hashem. On the other hand, yes, there is this possibility, right? This is the underlying fact that I don't have an infinite source of wealth that can just guarantee that I provide for everything. You could take this other things, right? Should you think of yourself as knowledgeable or ignorant? Both. And you see how these reinforce each other? It's not like, oh, I'm this wonderful person, and then Satan is coming and tempting me. I was like, no. There was a famous Hasidic, there's an expression called machshava zar, which means foreign thoughts. And someone comes and complains to the Hasidic mentor, and he says, I'm plagued by these foreign thoughts in the middle of my prayers. And he says, they're not so foreign. Those are your thoughts. Right? Yeah, they're coming from your heart. And, and that's why, again, so you're not, I'm not such a holy person. How to deal with that later, Hashem's going to talk about that in more specific ways. But yeah, it's not like God is sending me these, no. I mean, maybe he is sending me, but he's working with who I actually am. They're coming from my heart. And yet, that's not the totality of me. Right? And the context of my life is not letting that, for lack of words, that side of me dictate how I'm going to live my life, dictate my values, dictate my decisions. Right? And that's apparently a very valuable thing. It's not what I'm going to explain. But yeah, that's the reality of me, and that's the reality of most of us. You ever you ever see these old Disney movies, like the fairy tales, like Cinderella, or so there's the good characters and the evil. The characters are not incredibly complicated characters, right? They're all these archetypes, right? Which, by the way, is a good thing. There's a reason for that. It's not like that, because that's what those. No, because people they're not realistic. I mean, that's what they're supposed to exemplify certain things. But real people, right? Are real people good or real people bad? Real people are both. Are you a real person? So then what are you? Okay? All right. Now, how does one... Okay, what? Except if you're a tzaddik. And you know what the honest truth is? That when you're a tzaddik, really a tzaddik, your frame of reference changes, and it turns out that within the tzaddik's frame of reference, you can still draw these types of distinctions. Explain to you what I mean. It's not. This is a bad analogy, but it serves the point. Yeah. If we look at somebody like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, and we go, wow, they're really wealthy, right? Warren Buffett. What are these people that are phenomenally wealthy? Is it possible for such a person like that to feel poor? Why? Financially poor, I'm saying. Not like poor because like they, quality of life kind of poor. Financially poor. Yeah, because most of us, we relate to money as the means by which we get the stuff that we want. Whether it's physical goods or opportunities, right? So we think of money as the thing we spend to get the stuff we want, right? It's there for spending. But there is a point at which you have so much money that the meaning of money shifts to a different focus, which is money is a status symbol. Are you the richest person? Are you the second richest person? Are you successful? Are you losing success, right? If you're worth of, $14 billion, then you go up to being worth, $50 billion, you're a successful person. If you're worth $15 billion and you go down to only $2 billion, well, you're not a successful person, are you? Now, if you have $2 billion, what are you going to spend $2 billion on? Right? So in my mind, what difference does it make? But your whole frame of reference changes, right? So lahavdil, I don't mean to say it's the same, but if a person actually has a kind of love of Hashem that a tzaddik has, the frame of reference changes. And so you have many of these same parallel issues. And this could create a miscommunication type of a thing because, they're saying something, they mean one thing, and we're saying something, we mean something else. And, which is why earlier on, the Alter Rebbe actually alludes to this when he says that the trait of the Beinoni is the trait of every person, and every person should strive to be a Beinoni. And the Tzemach Tzedek says every person means even tzaddikim. Even tzaddikim, if they're honest, in their own frame of reference, are going to have a similar type of thing, that what comes from their heart and what God really wants them are not always in alignment. Even what comes from their heart is a love of Hashem, but God is perfectly in alignment, and there's also this kind of issue dealing with those kind of internal conflicts and stuff. So yes, everybody on their level is going to have that issue that they're going to have to engage with themselves dialectically. Realize there's this side and that side. And the Alter Rebbe is going to give more concrete advice for that later on, but he's already alluding to it here. And he's going to actually really dig into it in chapters 29 and 30, and then talk about how to deal with that conflict in 31. But he's already seeing it here, right? He says these temptations are coming from our own hearts. Okay. And what is a person supposed to do? Thrusting the temptation away with both hands has been explained earlier. Okay, what is the idea of thrusting away with both hands? So there's a very famous story in the Gemara. There was a great rabbi named Rabbi Yeshua ben Prachia, which we all know about Rabbi Yeshua ben Prachia. How do we all know about Rabbi Yeshua ben Prachia? Because we all learn Pirkei Avos, right? Pirkei Avos we learn every Shabbos after Pesach through the summer months. And we learned Pirkei Avos about the different pairs, and he was one of the pairs. So he had a student. What? It is a universal Ashkenazic custom. Some do it only until Shavuos, and some do it throughout the summer. I do not know about Sephardim and Yemenites if they have such a custom, but it's pretty universal Ashkenazic custom, as far as I know. So he had his disciple, and his disciple made a comment that he felt was very inappropriate, and so he cast him away. And the disciple came back and tried to apologize and cast him away again. Eventually, Rabbi Yeshua ben Prachia decided, okay, he's learned his lesson. Next time he comes back, I will accept him back. And by Hashgacha Pratis, the disciple came back when Rabbi Yeshua ben Prachia was in the middle of reciting the Shema. So he made a motion with his walking stick for him to wait. And the disciple took this as one more rejection. And he went and started worshiping idolatry. Pretty serious. The disciple? Well, the Talmud says that therefore one should always have small deicha, the left hand pushed away, and yamin mekareves, the right hand pushed away. You should never push it with both hands, because look, if you push it with both hands, like Rabbi Yeshua ben Prachia, look what can end up happening. By the way, that disciple of Rabbi Yeshua ben Prachia, he has a name. Most people have names. Just generally how it works. He's known in the Gemara as Yeshu HaNetzri, known in English as Jesus of Nazareth. So, yeah, that didn't work out so well for us long term. So, the Talmud is quite clear is that even when you need to push away your disciple because he's misbehaving, you need to make sure that he's also feels like he's being drawn in. And so there's this expression of being pushed away with one hand and being drawn close with the other hand versus pushing away with two hands. So what does that mean with the mind, right? Because Alter Rebbe uses this expression, push away with both hands. Okay? If you think about how something is bad, are you pushing it away or are you drawing it close? Or are you doing both? You're doing both. You're thinking about it, you're pushing away, you're thinking about how it's bad, but you're also engaging with it. So it's occupying real estate in your mind. What would it mean to push something away with both hands?
Not think about it.
Right. And can you just not think about things? Or do you have to you change it? You right. So pushing with both hands means moving on and refocusing your life and your mind into other things. Not thinking about how bad temptation is. Not thinking about how bad this thought was. Okay? That's the idea of the Beinoni is in essence is that I prioritize my relationship with Hashem, and when other parts of me rise to the surface and start to get in the way, I don't let them, and I go back to my relationship with Hashem. I don't dwell on how bad they are and how I shouldn't have thought that. Right? Now, that's how Beinoni should live his life. To use a physical metaphor for this, what should you do if you are running, like say in a race, and you trip? Get up. It's running again, right? So what if you are living a life where you're prioritizing relationship with Hashem, and then something trips you up, enters your mind that seems to not be consistent with that? What should you do? Just go back to your relationship with Hashem. That's the Beinoni. I'm not saying that is easy, but it is simple. In the sense there aren't that many steps, it's not so complicated. But that's not like a tzaddik. And realizing that living life that way, it's a real investment, and it takes sincerity. And just because you've been doing it doesn't guarantee you're going to keep doing it. And value that and cherish that. Don't feel entitled and I deserve better and like whatever. You feel that way, and then realize that what you just did is a mitzvah. Don't be miserable. Now, there is another side to this, which we're going to have to stop here and continue tomorrow, which is there is an idea that you have to be accomplishing something. Up till now, what the Alter Rebbe has spoken about is that you're doing a mitzvah, which is a good thing, and he is speaking about that, the misery is coming from a sense of entitlement that isn't warranted. But there is another aspect, which is human beings cannot feel good about things that are pointless and meaningless. Okay? And so the Alter is going to start to address that, and also do that tomorrow. That if you feel like you're going nowhere, you're accomplishing nothing, that itself is going to make you miserable. All right?
Well, that goes back to the unrealistic expectations, meaning you could feel like you're not accomplishing anything, but it's just not true.
Right, but here's the thing: is it doesn't seem like you're accomplishing. We'll talk about it tomorrow. But there's another up till now. He said, first off, it's a mitzvah, and second off, it's the sense that I'm entitled to more is not grounded in anything. There's a separate issue that it actually just feels like you're accomplishing nothing, and we'll talk about what that is and how the Alter Rebbe addresses that. It's another facet of the problem. We'll do that. All right. Yes.
Basically, I was like,